ACE Limited is a financial intermediary that is active in forward and swap markets with its issuer and investor clients. You've been asked to consult on a number of client situations to determine the best course of action. Identify which of the following statements is associated with which ACE counterparty swap position. ACE's counterparty with this swap position will realize a mark-to-market gain if implied forward rates rise. So if rates rise, we must be receiving the floating rate. Because if we're going to receive a gain, you can think of it in terms of the floating rate. What would you rather receive? A higher floating rate or a lower floating rate? So we must be in a pay fixed interest rate swap, pay fixed, receive floating, right? ACE's counterparty with this swap position will make a net payment if the initial market reference rate sets above the fixed swap rate. We will make a net payment if it sets above. So we must be paying the floating rate. If we're paying the floating rate, we must be receiving the fixed, receive fixed interest rate swap. That means we are paying the floating rate. That means a negative sign in front of floating. So we would have the fixed rate minus MRR. And since MRR is the greater, this would be less than 0, which means we would be making a net payment. It says here net payment. ACE's counterparty with this position will face an initial swap contract value of 0. Well, that is any swap. This is both a receive fixed and a pay fixed interest rate swap. They're both set to 0 at initiation. So this is sort of an unfair question because it introduces terminology that was not introduced in the learning module at all. However, it doesn't matter what the terminology is. We can answer the question with reference to something else. ACE's client is an asset manager with a significant portion of its fixed rate bond investment portfolio maturing soon. ACE intends to reinvest the proceeds in 5-year bond maturities. Which of the following describes the best course of action in the derivatives market for ACE's client to address its bond reinvestment risk? Well, it wants to reinvest in bonds, and it's going to buy 5-year bond maturities. Since it's going to be buying bonds, if it's holding bonds, it's going to be receiving a fixed rate of interest. So whatever we do, we want it to be received fixed. ACE's clients should consider receiving fixed. ACE's clients should consider paying fixed. And ACE's clients should consider entering a series of forward rate agreements from today until 5 years from now under which it pays a fixed. We can get rid of these two because they say pay. We're going to be receiving. The rest of this question might have caused you some confusion, meaning that you probably couldn't answer it. You probably looked at them and go, I don't think it's any of them. So let's go through A and see if we can fix some of this stuff. ACE's client should consider receiving fixed on a cash settled, first of all, they are all cash settled, you can get rid of that, on a 5-year forward starting swap. Well, this is going to throw you. What is a forward starting swap? It is called a deferred or a delayed start swap. And what this means is that rather than enter into the swap today, we'll enter into the swap maybe in 3 months, but we will determine what the fixed rate is on that swap today based on the current structure of interest rates. We'll find a rate today, but we're not going to enter the swap for another 3 months. So that's why it's called a forward starting or a delayed start swap. This is new language, so that might have threw you. So let's just read again. ACE's clients should consider receiving fixed on a 5-year swap. We'll just call it a 5-year swap. That starts at some point in the future. That starts and settles in 3 months. I have no idea where 3 months is from. I read that and I go, in 3 months? Why 3 months? So I looked up here and said, did I miss something? It says invest the proceeds in 5-year bonds. It says maturing soon. It doesn't say 3 months. So I don't know where we got 3 months from. So if you're sort of troubled by that, saying where's the 3 months from, I got no idea where it's from. In 3 months in order to best address its bond reinvestment risk. It starts and settles in 3 months. That might have thrown you as well. Like, how can it start and settle at the same time? So let's just draw a timeline. here we are, and we'll just take the 3 months. Okay, fine. You're telling me soon, but now here you're telling me 3 months. Whatever. Okay, good enough. We're going to determine a rate at this point in time, and the swap starts at this point in time. If rates change, the value of the swap will change before we even enter it. So for a change in rates, the value of the swap will change. So the present value of the fixed rate bonds would also change over that time. So let's see if I can show you what happens here. So we enter into an agreement to enter into a swap at this point in time, and during this period of time, interest rates go up. Well, what happens to bond prices if interest rates go up? Bond prices go down. Since we're going to be receiving the fixed and interest rates go up, we're paying the floating if we're receiving the fixed, right? Pay floating. If interest rates go up, we're going to have a mark-to-market loss on the swap. However, we get to buy the bonds cheaper. So we're just locking in a price on the bonds. Let's say interest rates go, instead of up, let's say interest rates go down over that period of time. Well, if interest rates go down, bond prices go up. Suddenly those bonds will cost us more. But if interest rates went down, we're paying the floating, the value of our swap would go up. So the value of the swap would go up. We then cash settle it on the very first day that it starts. When we get to the time, okay, your swap is going to start, we say, we'd like out. We'll walk with our money. We'll take that money over to the bonds. Yeah, we're going to pay more for the bonds, but having that swap took care of it. Unfair question, I think, because you have not been introduced to what a forward starting swap is. You haven't used it to hedge the price of a bond. We've only looked at swaps in hedging interest rate payments or changes in interest rates, but not using it to hedge the price of a bond by using a forward starting swap. And again, who knows where 3 months is coming from. It's a sloppy question that really doesn't belong here. It's an unfair question altogether. It's an advanced question that you really shouldn't have had. ACE enters a 10-year interest rate swap with a client in which ACE receives an initial 6-month MRR of 1.75 and pays a fixed swap rate of 3.10 for the first semi-annual period. Which of the following statements best describes the value of the swap from ACE's perspective 3 months after the inception of the trade? Well, we're getting 1.75, we're paying out 3.10, so just with the change in time, we would have a mark to market gain, wouldn't we? Right? Because we're only receiving 1.75, we're paying out 3.10. That would give us a net payment that we've made. We made a net payment. If we have a net payment, we have a gain. That's just for the passage of time. However, these can change because rates change. So the value of the swap can change because rates change. We have no idea what happened to rates. We only have an idea of the passage of time. ACE has a mark-to-market loss on the swap. It doesn't have a loss on the swap. ACE has a mark-to-market gain on the swap, and you might be saying, aha, we've got it, which is true. Gain on the swap due to just the passage of time, because once it makes the first known net payment to its counterparty, the remainder of the future net fixed versus floating cash flows must have a positive present value from ACE's perspective. If we're just assuming time passes, we would be good. But the value of a swap can change as time changes and as rates change. It is highly unlikely that interest rates will just evolve over time to match exactly what all the forward rates are. So you can count from period to period, you can count on rates changing as time passes. While the present value of fixed and future cash flows was set to 0 by solving for the swap rate at inception, true. That is a true statement. We do not have enough information to determine whether the swap currently has a positive or negative value from ACE's perspective following inception, because we're left with one big question. Did rates change? Because if rates changed, then we have no idea. And it's not really, it doesn't tell us up here just to assume the passage of time or assume that rates stayed the same. So we have to say, well, it could be time, it could be rates. If it's time, we have a gain. If it's rates, who knows what's going on? At time t equals 0, ACE observes the following 0 rates over 3 periods, period 1, 2, and period 3. Which of the following best describes how ACE arrives at a 3-period par swap rate? And in the answers were quoted 3 different swap rates. And I saw that immediately and I said, well, the easiest thing to do is calculate what the fixed rate is. Discount factor 1, discount factor 2, discount factor 3. 1 minus the last discount factor over the sum, it's 3.6048, 3.6005. I can check B and be on my way. Let's see if we can make sure that's right. We get rid of this because it's not 291. We get rid of this. Since the par swap rate represents the fixed rate at which the present value of fixed and future cash flows equal one another, we get that so far. We first solve for the implied forward rate per period using 0 rates. Then discount each implied forward rate back to the present using 0 rates. I showed you how to do that in the video. And solve for S3 to get 3.605%. Sure, you can do that. You can take all of these. You can calculate all the implied forward rates. You can discount each implied forward rate back by this to get what the fixed rate is. Or you can just do it this way without ever touching the implied forward rates at all. Look what I get. Look what it gets. It's the same thing. You will get to the same rate. So I say, sure you can do that, but it's senseless and a lot of extra work. ACE's issuer client has swapped its outstanding fixed rate debt to floating to match asset portfolio cash flows that generate an MRR-based return. What are we doing here? We had fixed rate debt and we swapped it to make it floating rate debt, or we used a swap to make it floating rate debt. If we have fixed rate debt, we must have been paying fixed. And we'd rather pay floating. So there we go. We know we want a pay floating swap, which means we have a received fixed pay floating swap. If we swapped our fixed rate to floating, we must now be floating. And how it works is from the swap, we received a fixed rate, which pays this fixed rate, and we're left just paying floating. Which of the following statements best describes how ACE's mark-to-market credit exposure to the issuer changes if interest rates rise immediately following trade inception? Immediately following trade inception. So no passage of time, just the change of rate. So we don't have to worry about, well, time passed and rates change. What happened? That's hard to tell. Here, time did not pass, only rates changed. We're paying floating, which means whatever the floating rate happens to be, we have to pay it. Well, rates went up. Do we want to pay that higher rate? No. That's bad. B-A-D. As Mr. Mackey would say, higher rates are bad, okay? So, since the client receives fixed and pays floating, that is true, it faces a mark-to-market loss. That is true on the transaction as rates rise, increasing ACE's mark-to-market exposure to the client. A is true. Let's get rid of the other two. Since the client receives fixed and pays floating swap, that is true, it faces a mark-to-market gain. No, it doesn't. We can stop there. Since the swap's value is equal to the current settlement plus future expected settlement amounts, we can stop there. This is assuming that we had a change in time, that time passed, because we're talking about settlement. It changed immediately following trade inception. There is no settlement. It says here we do not have enough information to determine whether ACE's mark-to-market exposure to the client increases or decreases. If we're facing a change in time, and potentially a change in rates, and we're just told that time has passed, then no, we don't have enough information. If time passes, let's say we are here, and now we're over here, if time had passed and we're given the new structure of rates, we would have enough information. We would need to know how much time has passed and what is the current structure of rates to answer it. But time did not pass, only rates changed, so we do have enough information to determine. So, if only one of these things happen, a change in time with no change in rates, we have enough information. If we have a change in rates with no change in time, we have enough information. It's when both change, we need information about what time passed and what rates changed.